With the 2025 draft over, we now look towards 2025 NHL Free Agency, which is looking to be an absolute doozy, especially with a lot of top-end forwards and defensemen being available this year. Now, even though Mitch Marner seems to be on his way to the Vegas Golden Knights, even though everybody might get sued in the process, there are still a ton of other top free agents that I think teams are going to be all over, especially as they look to take that next step into the playoffs. But which teams do I see being the most active in free agency this year? And ultimately, where do I see the top forwards, defensemen, and goaltenders ending up? Well, we're going to go through all my predictions here today, so make sure you watch till the end for all that. And hit that subscribe button for you for more free agency content as we go through all the major signings and make all the content about them throughout the next few weeks. Now, even though Mitch Marner might be off the market, there are still a lot of forwards out here that can immediately fixture into a lot of teams' top sixes. Let's first start out with Brock Boeser, who is one of the best goal scorers available. Even though there are some holes in his game, and the speed, of course, is always kind of a bit of an issue for him, in terms of the goal scoring, the finishing, Brock Boeser has always been a pretty solid player. It's fluctuated a bit over the past couple of seasons, going from 73 points and 40 goals down to 25 goals this last year, but I feel like he was mostly a victim of just how inconsistent Vancouver was as well, how weird that center situation was. He does need a good center, I think, to get the best out of him, and going to a different situation, different change of scenery, I think will ultimately be good for him. Now, getting into the teams that I think make the most sense for Brock Boeser in the end, in terms of what the team needs are, I think Carolina would be a perfect situation for him. The only problem, though, is just how deep they are on the right side with Seth Jarvis, Jackson Blake, Logan Stankoven. Those are all three top 9 wingers to me and absolutely fill out in their positions. So even though Boeser will be a decent fit, unless he's playing left wing for some reason, even then they have some decent depth. I just don't know if it quite makes sense unless we see a different deal. And Edmonton's also been one that's been rumored, and also I think would be a pretty good fit, especially for Brock Boeser, but I don't know how Edmonton does that unless they somehow find a way to trade a Darnell Nurse. I just don't see it as all that realistic. The team to me that I think is realistic but also needs Brock Boeser the most is the Boston Bruins. And I think the Bruins will be pretty active in free agency this year. I don't think they want to just lie down and be a rebuilding team. That's not exactly the Boston Bruins MO. And even though they did pretty well in this last draft, I think they're still going to want to keep contending for themselves. And you look at the right side, and even though I could see a player like Poitras, especially after we see a center trade like Azaka potentially moving up the middle, even with Poitras on the right side, it's a little bit thin right now. I love myself some Fabian Lysell, but betting on him being a top 6 winger at this stage, I don't know if you can do that if you actually want to be competitive next season. But in the Bruins case, they have a lot of speed still in their lineup in that top 9. Brock Boeser could be a good complement, and to me, I think the Bruins just like a player like Boeser and the character that he is, and ultimately, I think that'll really lead to a lot of interest. Let's move on to a former Boston Bruin wing in Brad Marchand. And you guys know from my bold predictions video, one of my bold predictions was that the Florida Panthers would be able to keep all 3 of Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, and Aaron Ekblad. And we'll get into Aaron Ekblad in a little bit, but I think Brad Marchand is still pretty likely to end up staying in Florida, even though we've heard a lot about how Toronto would be a great fit for him and how Boston, of course, would like to have him back. I'm sure that would be the case. I think in Brad Marchand's case, Florida is just such a perfect spot for him with his play style, with his character. You've seen how much he's already bonded with basically everybody on that team in like a couple of months' time. I think he just feels like it could be a home for him long term. And hey, at 37 years old, a lot of retirement homes in Florida. Brad Marchand, I just think, as kind of the unk on that Florida team, it would just fit well for him to stay there long term. Now, I say long-term, but I don't think Brad Marchand is signing an 8-year contract or anything, but I could easily see him taking a pay cut, staying for 3 seasons, taking him until he's 4 years old, and with just how good he was this last year for Florida, 20 points in 23 playoff games, I mean, it's hard to really bet against that. In the Panthers' case, he's been such a perfect fit, and such a perfect fit in Marchand's case as well. I just don't see why you'd want to break it up. In Ekblad's case, it seems like there's a much bigger difference between the money that Florida's willing to give and the money that other teams in the league are willing to give, but I think in Marchand's case, Florida is pretty happy to keep him around for a reasonable cap in. And I think in Marchand's case, he knows the stage of his career, so why not keep it going? That leads us on to a winger that will not be staying with his team, though, and Nikolaj Ehlers, formerly of the Winnipeg Jets. If you're looking for just pure pace and skill with the puck, Nikolaj Ehlers is among the best in this class. And I will say, with Mitch Marner gone, is to me the most skilled, just pure skilled winger of this class available. He's somebody that has had his ups and downs, especially with the health, but when he is healthy, when when he is on his game, there are very few players that are as dynamic as Nikolaj Ehlers can be. The speed, of course, is the big thing, but you guys see this last year when he played in just 69 games. He got 24 goals, 63 points, and also wasn't too bad in the playoffs either. 5 goals, 7 points in 8 games, which I think is huge for his stocks going forward. On to the teams that I think can make the most sense for him. Once again, just like the Brock Boeser situation, I think Carolina would also be in the market for a player like Ehlers with his status and offensive potential, and of course, they love to add speed into their middle six, so it wouldn't surprise me, but I think just like if they were to acquire a Boeser, there would have to be a trade or some lineup situation going on there, finagling to make that happen, because they just recently re-signed Taylor Hall. They have William Carrier to that massive extension, or not extension, but that massive long-term contract, so I think there would need to be a move to actually make it happen, which is why I don't think it's going to happen, but Carolina, of course, can get pretty creative. We'll just have to wait and see what happens there. Another team that I think could make a lot of sense is the Islanders if they want to be a little bit active in free agency. I think Ehlers is just a perfect fit for what the Islanders need more of, more speed, more intensity with the puck on his stick. I think the Islanders just need more skill up front, and it wouldn't be too much of a determinant when it comes to this kind of retool the Islanders are going in. Even if they get an Ehlers, I still don't think they're even close to a playoff team next year, so I think for them, they're still looking to make upgrades. If they want to spend a little bit more, then Ehlers would certainly be up there for them. And the team that I ultimately see signing Nikolaj Ehlers in the end is the Nashville Predators. One of my bold predictions as well was that I saw Nashville being a team that is going to be heavily active in free agency this year, because that's just Barry Trout's style at this point. And look at this Nashville team, and there is still so many issues with it, but a player like Nikolaj Ehlers, especially with how many finishers they have in that system, I think could be pretty interesting, and I would like to see him on that middle six, bringing some speed and some skill that they haven't quite had a lot of. Besides really Philip Forsberg on the left side as well, they don't have many pure play drivers, but you look at it, and I think it would even out that lineup quite a bit. You get a Michael Bunting on the third line, which I think is just a better spot for him, Erik Haula on the fourth, and it would just bring a lot more balance, especially to that middle six. So I think Nashville's going to acquire a winger at some point, especially for that left side, but a player like Nikolaj Ehlers with the money that Nashville has to spend, I would not be surprised if it were to happen. Now on to another European forward that's fairly skill-based, really speed-based in Mikael Granlund. I don't really see any chance that the Stars were able to re-sign him, even though I thought he was a pretty solid fit for the Stars' top six. There's just not enough money to go around. But I think Granlund is a very underrated player, and in the right situation with the right deployment, can put up some pretty good numbers. You see with San Jose over the past couple of seasons, among their best players, and in Dallas, he was pretty much the same way, even if he wasn't the go-to guy. As a complimentary piece, I think he's pretty much perfect, especially for a second line. The three teams that I think make the most sense, starting with the Detroit Red Wings, I think Granlund could pretty easily go into that first line left wing spot, replacing a Michael Rasmussen if they really wanted to, or he could play on the second line, he could play on the third. I think the versatility, especially for Detroit on that left wing, is a massive prioritization. They don't really have many guys besides DeBrincat that I think are definitive, true top six pieces. So I think for the Red Wings, if they want to spend a little bit to that forward group, that's where I would really see them focusing on. Toronto is another team that I could see being a pretty good fit, just like Detroit. After Nyes, the left wing depth is a little bit suspect, but I think he would be perfect on that second line with Tavares and Domi bringing some good skill and speed. Domi, the intensity. Tavares, of course, the leadership on the ice and the way he presents himself with his overall ability in the offensive zone. So I think that could be pretty interesting, and especially if they were to trade for a player like Waugh in the Mitch Marner deal, perhaps, then it would give them some stability in the center group. But if they don't do that, then Granlund could play center if they really need to. So there's a diversification in Granlund's game that I think would be appetizing for Toronto. But ultimately, who I see signing Granlund is the Carolina Hurricanes. I think especially for Granlund, how he can play center, he can play wing, he can play all over the lineup, up and down, be versatile in his special teams deployment too. I just think for Carolina, it just makes so much sense. Again, somebody that has been there in the playoffs quite a bit, has proven some good points as well in the playoffs too. So I think for the Canes, it just makes a ton of sense. We'll have to wait and see if there's an actual trade to happen there, but I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe try to have Granlund as a centerman in that Carolina system, potentially as a second line center behind Aho. And of course, we know the Canes love their Finns, so Granlund will be a pretty interesting bet. But let's keep it going here and go on to one of the best centers in this market, which is saying a lot about the centers in this market, and Pius Suter. And I like him quite a bit. I think he had some really good scoring this last year for more of a two-way centerman. You see for 81 games, 25 goals, 46 points, can play in all situations, defensively, of course, with the penalty kill and the face-off ability. Suter just a very versatile Swiss, I guess. I wasn't even saying that on purpose, Swiss Army knife, even though, of course, he is from Switzerland. But I think because the center market is just so incredibly dry, a player like Suter is going to get a lot more money than he otherwise would have. I could go through the teams that I think will make sense for Suter, but I'm going to be honest. I think he ends up as a Boston Bruin. I think the Bruins are going to be pretty active in free agency. If they don't get a player like Boeser, I don't think it's the end of the world, but I think they really want to change up that center situation for next year. Likely as Lindholm, Suter, and then Casey Middlestat. I really don't see Zacha staying there long term. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But in Suter's case, he was also pretty good with playing with some of the Canucks' best players. So I would not be surprised if there's a situation where the first line is potentially Geeky, Suter, and David Pastrnak. I think that could be pretty interesting as a pair together. But I think he's going to get overpaid by a little bit. But at the end of the day, Suter is just a very versatile player, a very responsible guy. And I think that is perfect for a team like the Bruins, who just need more help up the middle. Now, on to the last forward I'll mention here today. Let's go on to Andrew Mangiapane. And ultimately, I think the Leafs will be in on a few players, but I think ultimately this will be the highest end forward they end up picking up. Not the biggest skill in the world, but I think Mangiapane has always been a pretty underrated, intense forward. And this last year, 28 points in 81 games for the Caps in a decent middle six role. That's what I ultimately see him being in Toronto. He can play up in the lineup if he really needs to, but just the intensity in his game, I think, will be liked for Toronto. The only thing is that he's not super big, and Treliving loves his big boys, but I think in Mangiapane's case, just as a third-line role player, I see the Leafs being pretty active on guys like that, and I think Mangiapane kind of checks the boxes of what the Leafs want. Now, let's move on to the defenseman of this market, because I think that's honestly the biggest strength of this free agent market. There's a lot of good top four ready defensemen that are still available and haven't been re-signed. The biggest one and the biggest name is Aaron Ekblad, who, of course, is somebody that I still think most likely ends up getting re-signed somehow, some way by the Florida Panthers. But I think out of the three of Marchand, of course, Bennett, who's already re-signed, and Ekblad, I think Ekblad is by far the most likely to end up leaving, especially to a team that's willing to give up a ton of money. I think Ekblad ultimately wants to get paid. Now, I would not be surprised to see the Nashville Predators in this race. I think they would really prioritize a right defenseman if they were to sign one in free agency. I think they could go for another if they don't end up landing an Ekblad, but of course, with them signing Brady Shea, trying to go for a veteran defenseman last time around, I think Ekblad would be extremely appetizing for Nashville, but might just be a little bit too much for the Preds to handle in terms of the pure AAV. We'll just have to wait and see on that. I think San Jose also makes a ton of sense. I think they need to get to the cap floor somehow, some way. Ekblad would certainly be a really interesting veteran to add to that team. They need some big bulk. They need some defensive ability on the right side especially. They haven't drafted too many of those guys either. So I think especially when you have guys like Sam Dickinson, to have a guy like Aaron Ekblad to learn from, especially as a high draft pick, could be pretty interesting there. But ultimately, the team that I see ending up assigning him is the Anaheim Ducks. In terms of the blend of wanting him, but also having the cap space to use, I think Anaheim just makes so much sense for the Ducks. And of course, with Pat Verbeek, we know the type of defenseman he likes to go after. Radko Gudas, Jacob Trouba. I could pretty easily see Ekblad filling into that top pair role, having him play like Gudas in the second pair, and then Jacob Trouba as the third pair defenseman. I just think for Anaheim, they want to make big money moves. They just got rid of the John Gibson contract, for example, so that's going to end up freeing some cap space in the end. And you look at it too, Gudas and Trouba both having just 1 year left on their contract. I think only one of those guys is going to get re-signed by Anaheim anyways, so there might be a hole for Ekblad to fill, even going into next year after this next season. So I think Ekblad just fills a ton of boxes for the Ducks. He's the exact type of player they'd like to go after, and they have all the cap space in the world to burn. Plus, they want to make some big progressions. Ekblad is just perfect. On to Vladislav Gavrikov, who is one of the more high-profile defensemen as well in this class. I think he's fine in a middle pair role. I'm not the biggest fan of Gavrikov, but he eats minutes pretty well, skates decently, and of course has a good little bit of snarl to him. You see this last year, 30 points. 30 goals would be a much different story. He'd be getting paid a lot more. 30 points in 82 games. Really, this is the worst-kept secret in the world. He's going to be going to the New York Rangers, and it seems like for the past month, it has been the most rumored thing. If it doesn't end up happening, I'd be pretty shocked. On to another Russian left defenseman, though, that is open and available in this market. And I'm on Provorov. I was kind of expecting the Blue Jackets to end up re-signing him pretty fast, but that has not happened, and they seem wide apart in terms of the negotiations. So it's very likely that Provorov will be finding a new team, but he's pretty consistent. He plays a lot of minutes, gets around 30 points. I don't think is all that personally, but a lot of tools that still I don't think have been fully unlocked. But the team that I see actually sending him in the end is the San Jose Sharks. Now, I do think a right defenseman would fit a little bit better, but I think San Jose, again, wants to make some moves. I think they're going to miss out on a player like Aaron Ekblad, and that will be their main target that just goes away to Anaheim. The big reason for this is that I think they're going to want some more stability on the left side when guys like Sam Dickinson, Luca Cagnoni come in, and I do kind of believe that Mario Ferraro will end up getting dealt. Just a hunch to me just feels like this will be the offseason that the Sharks end up dealing him. I think they're going to want to get a replacement in a player like Provorov, and I don't think it's going to be for a 7-year term. I think in Provorov's case, he's going to want to get his money now, so I think it's going to be more so a 4-year contract, which would line up pretty well to when a lot of those San Jose left defensemen are coming into the fold, and a player like Simon Wong hopefully is ready enough at that point. So we'll see what ends up happening. I think a right defenseman is more likely, but I think the Sharks want to upgrade that defense somehow, and Provorov is a big name to do that. On to Dmitry Orlov, another Russian left-handed defenseman in this market. I have my problems with his game, especially what we saw in the playoffs. Oh boy, it was rough for the Carolina Hurricanes, but I don't think Orlov will be staying in Carolina. The one team that makes the most sense when I just keep going back on it, I have a feeling that Dmitry Orlov is going to find his way to the Winnipeg Jets. You already got, of course, Josh Morrissey, so that's taking up a big role. But I think Orlov, with his physicality, even though he's a smaller defenseman, especially on a bottom pair, I think could make a lot of sense. The big thing that I see happening is that I don't think Orlov's going to be a fast signing. I think he's going to take a while this offseason and be one of the final higher names available in the market. I think a team like Winnipeg's just going to be like, okay, let's try to scoop him up while his value is a bit lower and eventually bring him onto the roster. Let's go on to a lefty that is not a Russian this time around in Ryan Lindgren, formerly of the Colorado Avalanche. Now, we did hear a little bit after the Charlie Coyle deal, the Avs might be interested in re-signing Lindgren. I don't know why. He just wasn't a good fit for them whatsoever. And on paper, I think it worked a little bit better than it actually did on the ice. I mean, they needed a little bit more intensity and grit on their defense, but Lindgren, I just didn't feel like played all that well for the Avs. I'm personally really low on Lindgren at this stage. He had all the opportunity in the world with the Avs to really improve and just kind of was iffy in my opinion. But he's still somebody that with the pedigree, with the physicality, with the way he just lays his entire body on the line, he's going to get paid still. And at 27 years old, a lot of teams are still going to see that as a person entering the prime of their careers. And the team that I see actually signing Ryan Lindgren in the end is the Columbus Blue Jackets, getting kind of a Provorov replacement, a lot more of a defensive player than Ivan Provorov is, but likely having him as that second pair defenseman behind Zach Werenski to give Matejchuk a little bit less of a full thrown to the wolves type of role next year. But it will give them some more depth on that defense. It will give them some more stability if Lindgren is actually able to play up to this full-time level. But for some reason, man, Lindgren just speaks to me as a Don Waddell type of defensemen, and to me, I think Columbus is going to be all over him. Now going on to somebody that I hope gets absolutely paid this offseason in Nate Schmidt, somebody that has absolutely turned his career around in many ways. He was never a bad defenseman by any means, but hasn't been at that high profile level for a couple of seasons now. But of course, on the Stanley Cup winning champion Florida Panthers, he was unbelievable in the playoffs, getting 12 points in 23 games. It's just insane what he was able to do, especially in the Stanley Cup final, where I think he got like 5 points in that final. Insane to see. But I think in Schmidt's case, he's going to be a pretty good story because I don't think he's going to end up staying in Florida, but I think he's going to end up in a pretty good spot for himself. Ultimately, I see him signing with the LA Kings because I think, especially with their left D depth, as we'll see in a second here, I think it's a little bit suspect. And just like Lindgren to Columbus, Schmidt just kind of feels like an LA King type of player to me. Of course, when you have Gavrikov out of the lineup, there's a bit of a hole there when it comes to the left side of the defense. I don't think you want to have Edmondson in a middle pair role if you're, well, a competent defense, but I think in Nate Schmidt's case, he can bring some pop if he really needs to, some intensity, and of course the pedigree that he has shown with, of course, this now Stanley Cup and the playoff performance. I think LA is going to be all over the play like that, and I think again a lefty is, and as somebody to kind of replace the minutes that a Gavrikov has left, I think will be pretty important and a priority for this offseason for them. On to the last defenseman I want to talk about here in Nick Perbix, and one of the few right defensemen in this class, but big at 6'4", 205 pounds, moves well. He's had some iffy moments in terms of the decision-making in Tampa Bay, but I still think he projects decently as a bottom pair defenseman, and even though he's not the most physical guy in the world, still has the tools and the capacity to do so. The team that I see signing him is the Nashville Predators, of course, being active, already getting a player like Nikolaj Ehlers. I think Perbix just makes a lot of sense. I don't think they're going to be able to get an Aaron Ekblad eventually, or even a Dante Fabro, because, of course, Fabro just left Nashville and is a lot better for it. But I think a guy like Perbix, he's in a position to get paid. Tampa Bay, I don't think is going to be able to do that, but the Preds have the opportunity to. But let's go into the last player I want to mention here, and the only goaltender that I think is really worth mentioning in this year's class, in Jake Allen. 34 years old. We've heard a lot about him in this class, that he might be looking for upwards of $5 million. I don't know if he's going to get that much money, but I mean, he was great in a backup role for New Jersey last year, a .908 save percentage in 31 games. He's somebody that has proven himself as just this great 1B, somebody that can put up some good numbers in bigger games or in shorter amount of games. He's just always dependable, always consistent. You know what you're getting out of Jake Allen. There was a couple teams I floated. The Philadelphia Flyers, with their goaltending situation being a complete mess, I think has to jump towards the top end of the totem pole. But the team that I think I kind of want to see Allen sign with the most is the Calgary Flames. And this is a situation I think would be great for both sides. Allen, I think, has the capacity to get paid in Calgary. They have a decent amount of cap space this offseason. But the big thing that I want to see Calgary really prioritize is somebody that is stable behind Dustin Wolf. Because the last thing I want to see happen is Dustin Wolf being run into the ground, playing like 60 games immediately in his sophomore season, and likely having some pretty big struggles because of that. I think he could be good enough to play in that role. I love Dustin Wolf, but I want to see him get some security, especially if there is to be an injury in his early career. Have somebody that is actually competent enough to come into that role and take some games if there's a stretch where he's too tired to be able to take that amount of load. So I think a team like Calgary would make a ton of sense to sign an Allen to a 2 or 3 year type of deal, have just this great veteran backstopper for a player like Dustin Wolf to really learn from and feel a lot more safe under. But those are my predictions for a ton of the top free agents in this year's class. Hopefully you guys did enjoy my breakdowns and predictions. If you guys did, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell, and comment down below. I want to know your predictions down in the comments. Where do you see all these guys going? Out of all these players, who do you want your team to end up signing in free agency? Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all of my trade rumor content right in one playlist. I will see you guys in the next one, though, and have a fantastic hockey day. Goodbye.